Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 81. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Wednesday, Steelers Nation. Dave, getting the offseason moving along here. Draft profiles going up on the site. Some coaching-related matters to talk about today. Pittsburgh starting their OC search. How you doing?
Happy Wednesday. Woke up this morning to a Alex Kozora 2024 NFL draft player profile. That was that's like Groundhog waiting for the not Groundhog Day. What's the one where the rite of spring there in Punxsutawney?
Yeah, that's Groundhog Day.
Oh, is
that
Groundhog Day? Okay,
Yep.
Getting a little bit confused there out of the chute there, but it's like spring is coming, right?
Yeah.
Alex Kozora has his first draft profile up, and it's a guy that we talked about the other day, Darius Robinson out of Missouri. We'll talk a little bit because I went watched one game of his as well since we last talked, and also we'll compare and contrast notes, and obviously got some offensive coordinator news to or at least reported, I guess, interviews or seeming forthcoming interviews that we'll talk about. So we ought to be able to squeeze an hour out of this today.
I think we will. Let's jump right on into it, Dave. Pittsburgh kicking off their OC search, at least according to reports. Nothing official from the team yet, but the two names we can put in the OC basket: Zach Robinson, the Los Angeles Rams pass game coordinator. Pittsburgh has submitted an interview request to the Rams to talk to Zach Robinson. I'm sure that'll happen at some point here sooner than later. And then apparently, and this one to me is it's a little strange just based on how it got reported out, but Peter King revealing just mid-conversation on Tuesday in a radio appearance that Pittsburgh plans to talk to Kliff Kingsbury as well, who worked at USC in 2023, the former Arizona Cardinals head coach and kind of known as an offensive guy. So starting with Robinson here, Dave, again, they're going to cast a wide net. They're going to interview a bunch of people. So I don't want to necessarily react, or I should say overreact to any one particular name, but Robinson, kind of that young up-and-comer in the McVay system, former quarterback. There are some ties to Mason Rudolph, whatever that's worth. Your impression of the news here?
First and foremost, it's important to reemphasize that these are reports. The team has obviously not announced this stuff as far as interviews or anything like that officially. I think the Robinson one came from Albert Breer, and the Kliff Kingsbury one came kind of nonchalant by Peter King. But the exact wording that he used sure makes it sound like meeting's going to happen or has happened or along those lines there. So Zach Robinson, my overall thoughts on both the names, overarching thoughts, is that like you said, casting a wide net here. Obviously, if you go back and you parse what Mike Tomlin had to say about kind of what he's looking for in an offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, because of the lack of the actual OC play calling experience, would seem not to fit in that category. Now, the more I thought about it with Robinson's more exciting because of what you don't know about him, to me, right? You don't have him as he's an up and comer. He has not yet hit the NFL yet as a true offensive coordinator, play caller. And then obviously kind of his roots and his path to where he is right now probably makes him the more exciting of the two because of the unknown related to what his potential. He's probably going to be an OC at some point.
Yes.
In the National Football League. I think we both can agree on that. The lack of experience at that right now is the pause of concern, especially when rolling back through what Mike Tomlin had to say here. The more I thought about it when it comes to him, the relationship Mike Tomlin has with Sean McVay, I almost wonder if this was a courtesy, get his name, help him get circulated and comfortable with the interview process. And then on top of it, why not pick his brain on, because you never know what you might miss,
Sure.
And, you might go into this thing thinking, well, this is what I want. But if you don't interview other outside fringe candidates outside of maybe what you have written down as things you're looking for, you might miss the, look, who thought Mike Tomlin was going to be the head coach of the Steelers way back in what was it, 2007 there. And 1 year defensive coordinator, up and comer in the league. So could Zach Robinson be the new the new up and comer there? So and then obviously you've got the links to, Mason Rudolph, and he helped train and Mason Rudolph during the combine and pro day stuff. And both those guys are Oklahoma State products. No, I don't think you just look at it and say, look at it from that angle. It's just something else to note in there. But and then obviously you've got the links to what's going on over there with the Rams and what McVay's doing schematic wise. And so, look, I'm glad to see them cast a wide net. And I don't think Robinson's going to be the selection, but it is good to see them cast a wide net.
Here's what I think the interview request boils down to. Talking to presumably a smart individual coming from a system of success in Los Angeles, from McVay that's produced OCs, Shane Waldron, for example, in Seattle, now the Bears OC, the guy that I wanted, and now obviously off the table. For whatever it's worth, and it's not worth much, but it should be worth mentioning that Robinson did call plays for the Rams this preseason. Sean McVay is pretty well known for letting assistant coaches become the play caller in the preseason. Waldron did that before he got hired away by Seattle. Robinson did that the preseason, called him from the booth, called him from the sideline. So obviously it's not regular season. There's not really the game planning element, the pressure element, etc. Your playbooks pare down, but at least the actual physical act of doing it, Robinson has at least done it before, albeit to a different degree than he would if he gets hired as an OC somewhere.
Agreed. And you would agree that you would be a bit shocked if he ends up being a selection.
I don't know how I would react to it, probably to an extent, because I think they do want somebody who has had that experience overall. That would be their strong preference, at least, because the last two, OCs in Pittsburgh had never called plays at the NFL level. And Randy Fichtner, Matt Canada, they want somebody who feels like they don't have to learn on the job and can kind of hit the ground running and maybe reduce some of the growing pains as you install a new offense, and a really important year for this team, this offense, and for somebody like Kenny Pickett. I don't think it's necessarily a get his name out there, because he seems to be in pretty high demand. He's interviewed with the Raiders. I think the Patriots are talking to him. He's had a lot of interest. And as you said, probably is going to be an OC sooner than later. But I just think they want to, Tomlin respects McVay, respects what they do over there in Los Angeles, and want to pick the brain of somebody who's part of that tree.
And, maybe McVay said, hey, you should talk to him,
Yeah, a good chance of that, I think.
And early in the process, why wouldn't you?
Sure.
So we'll see where that goes. Anything else to add about Robinson?
No, we covered it. Now with Kingsbury, again, as you kind of referenced, the only person that's mentioned this so far was Peter King, and he mentioned it so casually. He thought he was talking about the weather in Pittsburgh. He was asked about this in an appearance on 93.7 The Fan. They were talking about Kingsbury just kind of theoretically, and then King just happened to say he's spoken with Chicago and he's going to speak with Pittsburgh, really interesting places, and kind of had to do a double take on what King had said. And that's all he said about it. But that is exactly what he said. So unless he misspoke and got confused, he's reporting apparently that Pittsburgh at some point will talk to Kliff Kingsbury.
And then what, there the report late last night about him talking to the Eagles, was it?
Yeah, we confirmed he interviewed virtually with the Eagles on Tuesday. That is confirmed.
Okay. As far as Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, obviously head coaching experience most recently with the Cardinals. If you look at what he's at his history and what he tried to do in Arizona, obviously an air raid product, and at his core, kind of the schematics that he has used, and kind of the system that he's part of and likes to be attached to. I think when you go back with his work with Arizona, you didn't see a lot of motion there. You saw hardly any under center type stuff. You saw a lot of static usage of personnel. In my opinion, what I know about his offense, didn't do a good job of marrying pass game to run game very well. To me, it seems kind of like an odd fit, and it doesn't. I would choose them not go down that path unless Kingsbury has evolved, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. And that was because he was on that list I was considering when I put together the most logical options initially. And I kind of scratched him off, never wrote him up because, the system didn't feel like it totally fits what Pittsburgh is looking for, a bit more wide open, a bit more that spread feel. I thought Peter King made the interesting point to note that, Kingsbury, some of his teams have had success running the football. In Arizona, there were years where they were one of the better running teams, but of course they had somebody like Kyler Murray that utilized the scrambling and quarterback run game, things that you're not going to get to that degree in Pittsburgh. So I think those numbers get skewed a bit by that quarterback mobility that kind of helped boost those numbers that Pittsburgh would not be able to offer.
Right. I just remembering what he did at Arizona, and obviously his schematic roots. And once again, you always want to talk to guys and get their thoughts, and maybe things that he learned and is willing to implement as far as changes go. It just, what's on tape most recently with him in Arizona feels like an odd fit.
Yeah, to a degree. I don't want to make, and I have not made a final conclusion because whoever the hire is, I'll do, a real thorough deep dive into. So I'm not trying to, put thumbs up, thumbs down, but I'm kind of with you in terms of just, it feels like Kingsbury's system is different than what Pittsburgh, what their strengths are, what they plan to run. I will say the Cardinals offense, even in bad years, were never terrible. I mean, their worst year was better than Pittsburgh's had in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of points per game, and they had some years where they were one of the, again, better scoring offenses. So, the guy is known for an offensive background and offensive mindset and, success in college. So, I can see those things. And again, experienced guy, has called plays, kind of a different version of maybe what Zach Robinson will be 10 years from now, where it's, you've had that experience and you've worn those hats. You've been a head coach, you've been a play caller, college, NFL level, you kind of have those different backgrounds. So again, that's part of the casting the wide net, but we'll see if the interview even happens and, how far things go. I'm still kind of waiting for some more reporting because I imagine if Kingsbury is really in talks with Pittsburgh, other outlets will pick up on that pretty quickly.
Yeah. As between the two, talking about Robinson and Kliff, Kliff obviously really checks all the boxes that Mike Tomlin rolled through. Just whether or not he likes what he hears as far as ideas and schematics and how he would implement that in what the Steelers plan on being personnel wise moving forward.
It was still just so strange because King, I almost get and I'm just kind of speculating, and King said what he said. There's no dispute about the actual quote, but I almost feel like he was under the impression that Pittsburgh had already talked to him, and that's why he was being asked about Kliff Kingsbury, and he just kind of said that. I wish somebody would have followed up and be like, right. Can you repeat that like 10 more times, Peter? Are you saying that they're talking with Kliff Kingsbury? It just was so so off the cuff. So I'm still waiting for some more reporting.
Just go ahead and tell the folks up front. We debated even writing that up.
Yeah, I mean, whenever, because let me find the exact quote. I want to make sure I'm as accurate.
Well, he said
as possible.
Something going to talk to go. It was the direct quote was going to talk to Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, let me pull up the exact kind of context in quote. He said, quote, right now he's talked to the Bears and he's going to talk to the Steelers. Interesting places. The Bears are a running team. The Steelers are a running team. I'll tell you this, if he gets one of these jobs, I guarantee you that team will be a running team. Going back to King, believing there's a bit of a misnomer when it comes to Kliff Kingsbury. So, but again, it was so tucked away and just, not mentioned again that I'm just kind of waiting for some more information.
All right. So, I mean, by the end of the day, maybe it comes out that he didn't talk to Pittsburgh or isn't going to talk, but and with there being the report late last night about him talking to the Eagles, I mean, at least it sounds like he's back in the circles of talking to people. So it wouldn't be out of the question that he is or has talked to the Steelers.
Sure. And he talked with the Bears too before Shane Waldron got hired. I just, if the reporting's out there about Chicago and Philadelphia, why has no one else said anything about Pittsburgh? How have none of the national reporters mentioned that? Because that's a huge name. It'd be a huge story. Pittsburgh, Kingsbury. That's a pretty big headline to pick up on, and no one else has mentioned it so far.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see.
We'll keep it posted.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
And King said what he said, and so there's no debate about that. Before we talk about some more coaching type things, Pittsburgh signing 5 more players, to their offseason roster announced yesterday. Defensive back Kalen Barnes, defensive back Thomas Graham, linebacker Tyler Murray, linebacker David Perales, and defensive back Josiah Scott. So 3 defensive backs and 2 linebackers. Perales, undrafted free agent, is bounced on and off the practice squad over the course of the season. I think most of these guys were on and off the practice squad at some point. Barnes, Scott. I don't think Graham was. He might be the exception. I think he was brought in for a workout at some point late in the season. So Pittsburgh adding some defensive backs to the roster.
Yeah, they're starting to fill up that 90-man roster a little bit now. What are they at number-wise? I don't have my spreadsheet open. Oh, here I do.
I know you always have it open.
Yeah.
It's always on the ready.
I got to find it in one of the 130 tabs.
Where is it in all these spreadsheets is the question.
Looks like 65 players under contract now for 2024. Research the credited seasons of all these recent guys. Most of these guys have 0 credited seasons, so it puts them at the 795,000 mark, the minimum. There are, however, a couple of them that, like Josiah Scott, has several credited seasons. Him and Marquez Callaway are who was in that initial batch. They're interesting futures guys in that they have, I think, 4 credited seasons under their belt. And even though their salaries are listed at $1.125 million, you get the veteran benefit aspect of the deal. So they have reduced cap charges at $985,000. Denzel Mims is one of those interesting guys that he's got, I think, 3 credited seasons. So he technically, from a cap standpoint, is the most expensive guy the Steelers have of all these futures guys at $1.055 million overall. It moved the cap needle just a little bit with these 5 guys. Not huge, but the team is, according to my estimation and based on a $242,500 million 2024 salary cap number, they're at $17.570 million over the cap right now. So I'll have an update on that, I think, on Sunday. We'll see if they sign any more future guys between there, but that should. And once again, like you said, the 5 most recent guys, I think, had spent some time on the practice squad this past season.
Can you explain what exactly a reserve future contract is? Is that a 1-year deal for the player's minimum salary based on experience? And does that change if they were to make the team come September?
Well, I think you can negotiate the salary to whatever you want it to be, but it's 99% of the time, I think it is a minimum for their credited season. And the reason they attach the reserve future tag to it is because technically the start of the new league year does not start until March.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a reserve future. It's a post dated contract, meaning that this contract will not technically go into effect until March.
Okay. And then 1 year, is that the standard
I
approach?
think one year is the standard on those. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. So we'll see if any of these guys make it.
None of them ever usually include signing bonus.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, hey, do you want to try out for a job?
Yeah.
And obviously we can only pay you the minimum for whatever your credited seasons are. So most of these guys you see are either 0 credited seasons or 1 credited season, but like I just mentioned, but you got guys like, Luke Barku has got I think 2 or 3 credited seasons at a $985,000 salary. You got a guy like Ryan McCollum who's got, I think, 1 credited season.
Does Jonathan Marshall have anything?
Jonathan Marshall has, I believe, two credited seasons. His minimum salary is $985,000, if I'm not mistaken. There, Des Fitzpatrick's another one that they've signed there. So the guys that they have signed already to reserve future contracts of that list: Ryan McCollum, Kalen Barnes, Jalen Elliott, Devery Hamilton, Thomas Graham, Luke Barku, Jonathan Marshall, Des Fitzpatrick, Marquez Callaway, Josiah Scott, and Denzel Mims all have more than 1 credit, more than 0 credit, or have at least 1
Mm-hmm.
credited season, I should say. And a credited season is different than an accrued season. Credited season determines what your pay level is, whereas accrued season works towards free agency.
And the difference is based on how long you're either on the team versus on the 53. Is that how credited versus accrued gets separated?
Credited season is 3 games or more on a either 53-man roster or IR or something like that, whereas accrued season is 6 games in a season to get an accrued season.
Gotcha. Good information there from our salary cap expert, Mr. Dave Bryan.
Stuff that people boring stuff that I enjoy figuring the nuts and bolts out of.
That's what we're here for. The community. There's a couple people listening, I'm sure, that can appreciate that. I do, at least. All right, Dave, going back to the coaching situation here in Pittsburgh, some things happening to the Steelers staff themselves. Report coming out on Wednesday morning. Steelers quarterbacks coach Mike Sullivan will interview for the Raiders offensive coordinator job. They've been busy casting a pretty wide net for that job over there, as Bo Hardegree, who replaced the other OC whenever they had all coaching changes, has not been retained by now official head coach Antonio Pierce for the Raiders. And so they're filling out their coaching staff and Sullivan on the interview list over there. Jerry Dulac seems to believe that Sullivan will not be retained. The new OC will basically bring in his quarterback coach, not have Sullivan hanging around. So it appears Mike Sullivan's time likely running out in Pittsburgh.
Man, he's been in Pittsburgh a little while now, hasn't he?
2021, so a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. It seems a little bit longer than that, I guess. But that wouldn't be shocking if he's out the door with a new OC coming in.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big transition for that quarterback room. New OC, new quarterbacks coach. I like Sullivan. I respected his background, his coordinator experience, his disciplined approach. I thought the way he taught the family of coverages, pretty well for those young guys. But not a big shock overall. A new OC comes in, kind of new coaching staff, new philosophy, get more people in line with that. So not gone yet. Don't know if he'll get hired by the Raiders, but he's being interviewed, and we'll go from there.
And he seems to think that he likes Pat Meyer's chance of staying, I guess.
Yeah, and I have as well. I mean, I know there's been some criticism of Pat Meyer, but with the way they ran the ball, the way that Mason Rudolph, consistently credited Meyer for good run game answers, and the way this run game really evolved over time, they got better against, pass pro, against overload blitzes. They were really rough early in the season, identifying, picking some of that stuff up. They improved as the year went on. And I just think they got so tired of all the turnover with the O-line coaches to go from Munchak to Surratt to Clem, and then Morgan as the interim, and then Meyer's been here for 2 years with a young group. You're trying to find some consistency, and that's not the sole reason why you should keep a coach. It should be merit-based, but I think Meyer has done enough in terms of the run game coordination, run game planning to stick around for at least one more season.
All right, Mike Munchak's name was back in the news this past week. Tell the people why we didn't feel it necessary to really write that up just yet.
Yeah, I didn't really comment much on it because there is no opening in Pittsburgh. They have an O-line coach in Pat Meyer, who I kind of expected to stay, and that's not been essentially, reported and confirmed by Jerry Dulac. They have an assistant O-line coach in Isaac Williams. In the reporting, 98% of the article that came out about Munchak was about him having a desire to go back to Tennessee, and that was essentially if Mike Vrabel was going to stay there. And of course, he's not. He's been fired by them, and maybe following Vrabel. And there was something in the report about him, Munchak, maybe considering other opportunities if they kind of fit from the coaching standpoint, geography standpoint. But it was such a throwaway comment and so vague. If he gets a job somewhere, we'll talk about it. We'll write about it for sure. If Pat Meyer gets, the axe and there's an O-line opening, then I'm sure we'll talk about it then. But that article was mainly focused on Munchak going to Tennessee if Vrabel stayed, if there was an opening, which is not relevant to Pittsburgh in really any meaningful way.
Okay. What else in the coaching staff circles and front office circles?
Yeah, we know an addition of one person and the departure of one individual. We'll start with the latter. Head strength and conditioning coach for the Steelers, Marcel Pastor, is leaving the team after 23 years. Most of that time spent as the assistant strength and conditioning coach, but he was promoted to the head role 3 years ago. And so he made that announcement on his LinkedIn page on Tuesday. Thanked the team, had great remarks, not seem to be a messy departure or anything like that. Said nothing but good things about the organization, about the team. But he is apparently leaving. So he was the guy that had that great arm at training camp. He would always warm Ben up early in practice, and been in Pittsburgh for 23 years.
I see a lot of people talking about that arm. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he was noticeable at training camp. They do in special team drills where they wouldn't have the kicker kick sometimes for their return drills just to simulate it. And Pastor would be the one that would, fire the ball 60 yards downfield to kind of simulate the kickoff. So the dude had a heck of an arm for sure.
All right. Did you tell the folks about some other interviews some guys on the staff are having?
I forgot to mention one. Gerald Alexander just kind of tucked away in Albert Breer's notes yesterday. He's apparently has interviewed, Alexander has, for the New England Patriots defensive coordinator job, which has opened up with, Gerard Mayo becoming the head coach there, and defensive, changes there. Belichick kind of the de facto DC whenever he was the head coach of the Patriots. So it does not sound like Alexander is the favorite for the job, but he has interviewed for the job. He played for the Patriots before, so that is worth noting. Alexander has kind of been an assistant on staff for a couple of years now. Not entirely sure he has a position. Does he have a position group, Alexander, in terms of his title? Or is he just kind of defensive assistant?
What do they call him on the Steelers media page?
Assistant defensive backs coach.
Okay.
So he was a DB in the NFL, interviewing for their DC job. So
he's another up and comer. He's like a defensive side of of Zach Robinson. You'd have to think on the path that he's on right now. At some point, probably not this off season, maybe next off season, he's going to be a defensive coordinator, right?
Potentially. I think he's a little bit greener than maybe Robinson, and I don't know as much about Alexander's coaching background. I think he was kind of more of just a broad-based assistant who was on staff and never even kind of mentioned, I think, like last year, and then kind of was officially acknowledged by the team, I believe, this past off season, and is carrying that assistant DB's coach title alongside Grady Brown, the actual secondary coach. So we'll see. I don't know if he'll get the job. I don't think he will, but he's certainly getting some looks around the NFL.
All right, I think we talked about this on the live stream. I don't remember if we talked about it on the last version of the podcast, but All-Star Game coaches.
Yeah, there's two of them, including Alexander. He is, I want to not get mixed up here. I believe Alexander is doing the Shrine Bowl as the linebackers coach, if I'm hopefully correct on that. And then Isaac Williams will be one of the offensive line coaches for the American side for the Senior Bowl taking place in a couple of days.
All right. Look at them tackles and centers.
Yeah, I should mention, as I kind of looked through the list some more, because I think it happened on the live stream or maybe during the podcast, that Williams, one of the guys who'll be coaching is Cedric Van Pran Granger from Georgia, one of the top centers in this year's draft. So a good chance to really work with him.
All right. Good stuff. And we'll, of course, have some staff members going two different directions here in the next couple of days, sending, I think, 3 to the Shrine Bowl and a couple to the Senior Bowl. So it's that time of year. I got all the sheets ready for the guys and starting to learn about a couple of prospects here as part of it. So, yeah, it's draft season.
Yeah, we'll talk about one of those prospects in just 1 second, but one more Pittsburgh Steelers housekeeping front office note. Appearing on the team website yesterday, or at least in the very recent couple of days, I saw it last night, is Donovan Moore Jr., who is now listed as a football analyst for the Pittsburgh Steelers. According to his LinkedIn profile, he was actually hired by Pittsburgh back in September. So it takes a while for the website to update, apparently, but that makes sense. So basically working in analytics, advanced stats, he replaced Will Britt, who left for the Cowboys in the summer of 2023, and so they hired Moore Jr. before the year began, and him and Tosin Kazim are the team's two kind of football analysts. And again, seems to be that advanced analytics background, which his team may be embracing more under Omar Khan and Andy Weidel.
Good eye, Alex. Warming up your eagle eye for the pro day circuit here.
Yeah, there you go. You know what's interesting? To talk about some of the coaching and front office searches. Andy Weidel did not receive, to my knowledge, one interview request this cycle.
Huh.
Which I thought he would have gotten some looks. That was, kind of one of those rising names. I mean, unless he either declined them or I don't think Pittsburgh can block if your actual GM interviews, because that's an upward move from assistant GM to actual GM. But I thought he would get some looks, and he's been quiet this entire cycle.
All right. So at least right now, it feels like they'll retain him for at least another year.
Yeah, it's certainly looking that way. All right, Dave, speaking of the NFL draft, as you mentioned, Senior Bowl coming up, and one of the names who will be down in Mobile is Darius Robinson, the defensive lineman from Missouri. As we talked about, the first profile I have written this draft cycle. You had mentioned, you brought him to my attention, the size, the length, he kind of fit, from a baseline measurable perspective, everything Pittsburgh looks for, 6'5", 300 pounds, nearly 35-inch arms. A guy I really wanted to see the tape on. I do like the tape. I like the scheme fit. Maybe not quite as impressive on tape as I, maybe anticipated or kind of hyped myself up for, but a strong physical player with a good bull rush, versatile, and I can certainly see him being attractive to Pittsburgh.
I can as well. I only watched one game, the Tennessee game, and the thing that stuck out to me with him is, and I think you noted this when we talked before we got on there, was the overall build. Looks a little thinnish for his listed measurables. But the long arms that we talked about the other day are evident in there. He loves that bull rush. He loves to get those arms extended. Does a good job of making hay, at least in that game against Tennessee, of getting push in the pocket. A little robotic in just that one game that I saw, can get stuck on blocks. You've, I think, watched a couple more games than I have. You say that there is a bat swim element to his game. If as an initial move, obviously does not have the hips or the gap, the ability to explode into a gap as, say, a Benton or the way Tuitt or even Hargrave. Doesn't have that level of my in my limited viewing of he is a bull rusher that needs to develop counters off of that. And it seems like there's a little bit of a limit to the to the explosion athleticism to him in getting into gaps.
Yeah, I think he's refined and technical. I think his hand use is really impressive in terms of block shedding. I think as a pass rusher, you've seen different moves. You've seen the bull, which is kind of his bread and butter, but he works the club over, swim, a little bit of the chop or, rip, even try to spin move once, though it's certainly not going to be a strength for him. But I've seen him win in different ways. But yeah, he's a little lanky, a little tall, a little tight overall. Not super, his snap timing's good, but it's not super explosive. Not incredibly bendy. Again, the way that Benton's able to kind of, flatten and be able to squeeze through. He's not going to be a super high impact pass rusher. So, but what I think is interesting about him, though, on the positive side, is he plays in a scheme that's kind of like Wisconsin. He was playing, 3-4 base end, a lot of 4-eye, some 5 technique. He even stood up on his feet a couple of times for the Tigers. He played defensive tackle until 2023. And they kicked him out to defensive end. So he's kind of got some inside-outside versatility. There was some defense that ran, run stunts and different games in the pass rush, schemes. And it was a defense that reminded me of Wisconsin. It reminded me of Pittsburgh. And that kind of helps make that projection easier. So that's going to be attractive as well.
Looking at what Draft Scout has on him, they list him as 6'5" and 1/8. 296. They have a 40 range time or a low time of 4.75 on him, a flat out 40 time of 4.83, and a range high of 4.92. So this is a guy that once he gets to the combine, you would expect to run under 5. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl. They initially have him projected somewhere between 2nd and 3rd round. I think that body type, the Steelers will be attracted to him. Because of at least what we know about him from a measurable and what I have seen from him from a limited tape standpoint. They will be talking to him. 2-time captain, voted 2-time team captain. I think that's important.
Yep.
When it comes to him. What else was there on him?
He's a really high character,
right.
Super respected, first team all SEC. He could have gone to Michigan. He's a Michigan man, but wanted to go and play in the SEC. And that's the kind of stuff that, Mike Tomlin's going to love for sure.
I'm just scratching the surface here. My initial thought of him coming out of the tape was a third round guy.
Yeah, I put a low 2nd round grade on him. Is kind of where I came in to start. I almost wonder if a 4-3 system might be a little bit better for him as a strong side end, just because he's a little bit leaner than I expected. But I think it can work in Pittsburgh. I think it's the frame to add some weight if need be.
Man, he's already listed at 296. What do you want him to gain? 10?
Yeah, I mean, it's just maybe just some more muscle, just maybe refining his body a little bit. Maybe it is just adding 5 or 7 pounds. I should note as well, he's not played a ton of football. He didn't start playing football until his junior year of high school. He was a basketball guy in high school, and the prep school he went to initially didn't even have a football program. He didn't start playing organized football until he transferred before his junior year, and really didn't play much as a junior. He's playing tight end, like his junior and senior season as well. So he's playing defensive line too, but he kind of was playing both ways. So he's not actually, he spent 5 years in Missouri. So he was kind of an older prospect from that standpoint, but has not been playing football since, Pop Warner, the way that some of these stories have played out.
You roll back to last year and we hit the first guy that we were talking about was Keanu Benton ahead of the Senior Bowl. And we both were pretty excited about him to get to his tape. And weren't disappointed. I felt a little underwhelmed this year when going from measurable to tape.
I agree. I think he's a fit. We're going to talk about him for sure because there just aren't many guys with that body type, which Pittsburgh really, wants, and it's so hard to find in this day and age. But when I was watching Ben, I was like coming out of my shoes going, this is a Steeler. And I'm not quite as emphatic about it. Not going to call my shot on it with Darius Robinson.
I agree. But we have to start somewhere, and we both agree that this team's more than likely going to draft a defensive lineman at some point, right?
They better, and if they're going to do it, you got to do it early. You can't spend a 5th round pick and hope that's going to be the guy. Listen, whenever they drafted Cam Hayward, I don't remember what the conversation was exactly back then. That was 2011. I was a little young whippersnapper back then, but I'm betting it was kind of panned because you had already established guys in Brett Kiesel, in Aaron Smith, but they knew those guys were only going to play so much longer, and they needed an eventual replacement and not have to find that guy in the same offseason as they lose a Kiesel or lose an Aaron Smith. And so Hayward sat his first 2 years, and that's not what the case will be today. In today's world, these guys play right away. But my point is, you got to find that guy a year early as opposed to a year late. And so you need a high investment, and you want to do it sooner than later. And this is a year you're probably going to start looking, pretty heavily at that possibility.
Right. And, obviously they got Keanu Benton, up and comer, had a good rookie season and all like that, but he's more than likely going to continue to play more inside than he is on the outside.
Right. I mean, he can play both. He was playing some more base end when Hayward went down, but they like him as a nose tackle. They want him to be a nose tackle, and he's not going to, their goal is to not have him be Cam Hayward's 1-to-1 replacement.
All right. Indulge me of who might be next on your list to look at.
Next is Zach Frazier, the center from West Virginia. My center is going to be high, I assume, on Pittsburgh's list. And so that's going to be one of the top guys, and I'm excited to watch his tape.
All right. I'll see if I can't cram something in on him to add some back and forth next time we talk.
All right. Good deal. Anything else, Dave? That was kind of the big stuff I wanted to go over. Anything else that you're looking for, or anything else you wanted to mention?
Let's talk about the cornerback room for the 2024 Steelers as it sits right now. Because my initial thoughts on this coming out, first and foremost, let's talk about, wasn't there a Levi Wallace report out there by Fowler?
Yeah. Was it a report, or was just kind of him saying he could see
speculation?
Report? Yeah. It's possible that Wallace could come back on a 1 or 2 year deal.
All right. My initial thoughts immediately before even looking at anything and diving deeper into this is, my gut wanted to tell me that first round cornerback might not be a thing this year. But when you dive deep into, we just talked about how this team has 65 players currently under contract for the 2024 season. We'll roll through the bigger names here. Patrick Peterson, there's a decision coming up on him in March when it comes to that roster bonus. Either he'll survive it, and if he does, he'll more than likely be on the roster. If he doesn't, well, there's another body to replace Levi Wallace is unrestricted this offseason. Chandon Sullivan is unrestricted this offseason. James Pierre is unrestricted this offseason. The other guy is under contract currently. Obviously, Joey Porter Jr., that's going to be one of your starters in 2024. Who else is under contract? Obviously, you got Corey Trice, your draft pick, who unfortunately spent the season on IR. Darius Rush, who saw only limited time, not only dressed but on the field during his rookie season, is I classify a developmental project along with Corey Trice. Who else? Who else do you have in that room other than these futures guys?
Yeah, and the futures guys don't have a ton of experience. Barku played for Jacksonville a handful of games in 2020, and he was in camp, and he'll be back again, we assume. But it's a pretty thin group that has not played a ton of football outside of the top 3 names.
And that room can get even thinner depending on what happens with Patrick Peterson. And right now I'm 50-50 on whether or not they're going to pick up this roster bonus on him. What does Patrick Peterson give this team as far as a cornerback goes?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, I think his outside corner days need to be done. I think he can still play in the slot, and then working off of that, just having that versatility to kind of bounce around in the secondary is going to be something that you'll have to replace if you do move on from him.
All right. Within all that, there's only a couple of ways that you can help, that you can start refilling that room, right? Free agency. If they re-sign Levi Wallace, man, and if that comes to fruition, that better be a cheap deal. That better be a bridge. A guy would start, because he doesn't give you much as a special team guy.
Yeah, it gives you nothing, really. What does he do on special teams? Nothing.
I mean, what has he averaged as far as special team snaps over the course of his career? Like 30 or 40?
And is that even like field goal block? I mean, he doesn't play he played 42 special team snaps this year, and I don't even know when those came. I mean, probably field goal block, because I don't think he does anything I know he doesn't do anything on punts or kickoffs or anything like that.
So if you bring him back, you can bring him back, but it better be with the eye of being cheap and knowing that he's probably not going to, or hopefully not going to, play a lot of snaps for you as a starter. And if he doesn't, then, I mean, it's hard to give a guy like that a helmet if he's not helping out on special teams.
I imagine they'll bring one back of Pierre or Wallace, but
I'd rather have Pierre, to be honest with you, just because I know what he brings you on the special teams aspect,
I get that. Although as a corner, that ship has sailed. They've tried it. They just don't trust him. He's not ever shown the consistency. I mean, yeah, he can do it, and took a couple of snaps in emergency situations this year, but they do have more trust in Wallace to be an actual. Wallace could be a potential nickel sub-package type of corner. Pierre is really just a gunner, a good one, but really just a gunner.
All right. When everybody will say, well, what's going on in free agency? Who are some of the top names when it comes to that? Everybody's going to watch what happens with Jalen Johnson, circling back to last year, and supposedly the Steelers having it, maybe interest in trading for him. Is he a fit? Absolutely. In my opinion, he would be a fit for the Steelers. The thing is, and there was a report since the season ended, right, where Ryan, what's his last name?
Ryan Poles.
Basically said that he's gonna be back. So to make that happen with them, they're more than likely going to have to slap the franchise tag on him. And if indeed that's the case, the only way he escaped Chicago is for them to trade, to tag and trade him. And I don't think you go, if you're knowing obviously he's an asset to them, they would probably want a nice penny to trade him under the tag. And then on top of it, any team that acquired Jalen Johnson from the Bears while under the tag would have to first be able to accommodate that. I think what's his projected tag number? Like nearly 19 million at this point. So let's say the Bears tagged him and wanted to trade him, and the Steelers were interested in it. They would first have to accommodate that high tag number under the cap, and then work out a long-term deal on him. Now, obviously, if they don't tag him, then it's on. I think you've got to throw your hat in the ring and make a play for a guy like that, especially at his age. He's still young. Jeez, he's young. Long story short, I don't think anything happens there with him. I think he remains in Chicago.
Yeah, I think it wasn't even a report. Poles said it at his year-end press conference that Jalen is coming back, which means we're going to tag him if we can't do a long-term deal, because they locked up Montez Sweat to a long-term deal, so they don't have to worry about putting the tag on him.
The next guy I think that'll be on people's list when it comes to free agents is L'Jarius Sneed. You could see him potentially hitting free agency. But then you get into, okay, if Jalen Johnson is off the market, is indeed L'Jarius Sneed the top free agent corner at that time? We all know that the supply and demand and those guys usually get a lot of attention, and you have to wonder if the Steelers would be at the forefront of being a high bidder on an unrestricted free agent like that.
Yeah, it would be top dollar. You'd be paying more to sign Snead than you probably have any free agent in Pittsburgh Steelers history, would be my strong guess to that. And will Kansas City even let him get away, because they become a more defensive oriented type of team, and Snead has played some really good football for them. So I don't know their cap situation. I don't know the outlook, but if he does get away, let's just say there'll be a lot of competition for his services.
From where you sit right now, do you think either Jalen Johnson or L'Jarius Sneed wind up wearing the black and gold in 2024?
No, but that's an easy answer to give.
Right.
I think the odds of that are just pretty low.
You start going down the list of unrestricted guys past there. You got Kendall Fuller, who I think the Steelers have shown some interest in him in the past, didn't they not, when he came out or whatnot?
I know I talked about him some around the deadline. I'd have to go back and check, but they probably did.
But he's also he's almost 29 years old. It feels like he's been around for a long time. Chidobe Awuzie is another one that could maybe potentially fit in that second tier. I don't think they'd have any interest in a guy like Stephon Gilmore at his age. I mean, he's 33, I think, at this point. You're already, when you get past there, you're talking about the Steven Nelsons. I think that ship's probably sailed. Kenny Moore, who a couple of years ago, I mean, yeah, give me some Kenny Moore, but Kenny Moore is already 30 now.
And a slot corner. I mean, he wouldn't fill the outside need.
Right. Now they might, they might have a need for a slot for sure. Here. Dory Jackson's another guy that we've talked about in the past over the years, but he's already 28. I feel like the ship has sailed there. Kason Nixon, guy that I think we talked a little bit about ahead of that game against the Packers because of their need at corner. But now you're already working on way down the list of unrestricted guys. Sean Murphy Bunting is a guy maybe to potentially keep a name on. I think he's going to be a free agent coming, after his contract ends with Tennessee. Of all the names, not talking about obviously the top two in Jalen Johnson and L'Jarius Sneed. I think when you roll down the list of guys that maybe you could foresee the Steelers go after, it might be a guy like Bunting.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at the list of free agents. I like that name. Did they have interest in him? I want to say they did.
I thought they did. Yeah, to some degree. I don't know if they brought him in, but
trying to search it just here quickly. But that rings a bell. But I could see that as being certainly more realistic than Sneed or Jalen Johnson.
Right. And then once you get past kind of those names that we rattled, I know we profiled them because I'm
not seeing anything on actual interest, but I'd have to do some more research. I think Nixon too. I like Nixon he's a slot guy, but he's aggressive. He's physical. He plays to run hard. He is also a kick returner. I know defensive players returning kicks and punts in Pittsburgh is a foreign concept, but there is that as well. It's a small thing. But I think the last two names you mentioned, they piqued my interest almost more than the top two guys, just from the sense of they're going to be cheaper and they're more
value guys,
realistic targets, than the others you mentioned.
They're long. They can. Even Nixon didn't he move around? He wasn't just locked on the inside, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd have to look at his, chart, but I view him as kind of a slot guy primarily.
I haven't gone deeper down the rabbit hole than that, and obviously you're way down closer to minimum value guys probably at that point. But if they were to go the free agent route, I think you're more looking at a Nixon or Bunting.
But I think your point is, first round corner should at least be on the board given the need and given that free agency may not be the path for the Steelers to go.
And this looks to be a pretty decent class when it comes to corners that fit because the Steelers like them long, big, physical. Obviously, the Steelers played a lot of cover 1, cover 3 this past year, along with some cover 2. You want a guy that you think you can press and play some one-on-one. You want a guy that's obviously willing to come out and come up and help in the run. This feels like a good class, at least my initial outlook on it, that they could do something within the first 3 rounds there.
Yeah. So I don't have a particular name yet, but I've heard the same about the kind of the strength of the cornerback class. And so I think that does make they're probably going to take a corner at some point here. I don't know exactly when, but I think sooner than later would make the most amount of sense. And
they could use a slot. They could use a slot too, couldn't they?
Well, Sullivan's a free agent. There's really nothing there. They kind of had lost that element of that real rough and tumble physical slot guy since Mike Hilton left. Sean Bunting brought in for a pre-draft visit in 2019. Okay. I know Pittsburgh loves to circle back to those guys. So it was because he's changed his name since. He was Sean Bunting coming out. Now he's Sean Murphy Bunting. So trying to find that was a little tricky. But there's some doc connecting we'll be doing come free agency, Dave. That's a great suggestion.
Okay, and we will obviously be profiling a lot of corners on the site here.
Yeah, and then I think we've already started that. Have a profile up on a Michigan DB today, and more to come for sure. All right, Dave. Anything else here? Any other directions you wanted to take this show in?
Do we cover everything on the pre-draft meeting?
Yeah, I think so overall. All right. Jerry Dulac did mention just other coaching. He said expected coaching changes. He didn't really mention anything other outside of Sullivan. Again, I expect more to happen offensively than defensively. There could be something defensively happening, but I think the offensive staff, for more obvious reasons, will see more turnover than the defensive staff will. And he said Terrell Austin expected to come back. His contract is expiring, but he believes he'll get a new deal in return in 2024.
All right. Shall we get to some reader or listener emails?
Yep. Let's get through some emails and close out today's show.
All right. Chris Lookhart. Good morning, fellas. Do you think that the offensive coordinator hire could give us a window into the thought process of the organization? Meaning if they hire a more traditional OC that wants to run the ball more, they'd be more willing to stick with the quarterbacks they have. But if they hire a younger, more innovative guy like a Kingsbury, they might look for a quarterback in the draft in that mold, more like a J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan, he suggests. Man, that's a broad question there. I think as an organization, I would think that they and probably several more meetings to come this offseason, but I would think that they probably have already a good idea of what their personnel makeup might be and what they want to generally be as an offense. I guess long story short, I don't think they say I guess the question is does the offensive coordinator dictate what they do at quarterback? It's kind of loosely what Chris is asking here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he won't have a direct role in who they pick, but whoever, we mentioned this before, whoever they tab as to hire, there's going to be a shared vision of what the quarterback situation looks like, and that'll be one of the talking points in the interview process. They'll have to be on the same page, and so when the hire gets made, they're all in lockstep about how they're going to approach the offseason. Do you believe in Kenny Pickett? Can you make him work? I get the point. I get the question. And yeah, if they were to, bring in somebody like a Kingsbury, a Luke Getsy that's kind of worked with the more mobile quarterback, then that's going to open up that conversation. But I don't think it necessarily has to or will directly point to that. I still believe the team when they say that, it's going to be Pickett and they want to re-sign Rudolph and essentially have those two guys duke it out in camp to be the starter.
And we're going to know, more than likely, we'll know the offensive coordinator before we find out what happens with Mason Rudolph.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the coordinator should be hired within 2 weeks, and Rudolph, situation won't be resolved until March at some point. And to your point that you made as well, if they bring in an OC and they go in a completely different direction for the quarterback, unless it's a free agent, Kirk Cousins, which really wouldn't be a stylistically different type of quarterback, we're going to know in terms of a draft pick. They're going to be on the pro day trail. If they really want to, change up and go to the draft for a top tier quarterback, they're not going to hide that from us. We're going to be well aware of that before April's draft.
I mean, we should get a sense that they're showing up at all those pro days like they were a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, they're going to do their whole, great tour, barnstorming tour across the nation as they did back in 2022. So, again, my thought is that whoever they hire as OC will have the shared vision that they're going to work with Kenny Pickett and hopefully Rudolph this year and try to make the best out of those two guys.
Okay, Kevin from LA writes in, I recall you guys once saying that you didn't have a rating system for players coming out in the draft. However, I would like to know your thoughts on what your player profiles have on Mason Rudolph and Kenny in terms of their ceiling, since Mason had a first round grade according to the Steelers at the time he was drafted. It makes it interesting to know how close they are in terms of tools. At this point, we can only hope they play to their potential under a new experienced offensive coordinator, given Mason returns. He writes, thanks for what you guys do. There's nothing like hearing the podcast intro, he says. So thanks for that, Kevin.
Thank you.
Look, back, we have kind of a more, tell them about the kind of the grading system that we've used for these guys the last couple years now.
Yeah, starting last year, I went to Jonathan Heitritter, who kind of leads some of our draft content, and said, let's put in kind of a standardized grading system of some sort to try to, give a little more quantifiable way to evaluate and mark these players and compare, past years. And so that began last year, carried over into this year. We didn't have that, I think for Pickett's class and certainly not for Rudolph's class. And so I'd have to go back and look at the reports and, I don't even know who wrote the report on Rudolph way back when. So I couldn't really give a great comparison between the evaluation of those two guys and their ceilings when they came out of the draft.
The thing I remember about Rudolph that year was writing a lot about him pre-draft because of Kevin Colbert was giving interviews, and there was obviously Mike Tomlin showed up at the Oklahoma State Pro Day, and we wrote about Rudolph and James Washington there. I did some tape study on him, and then obviously after he was drafted, and you can see there's like, what did I do? Like 3 or 4 contextualizations on Red Zone. And I mean, I did a bunch of study on him after the draft there. My main takeaway from what I remember on Mason Rudolph was he was a strong arm guy, a pocket passer, a guy that did not extend. There was some extended play, very, very limited in his college tape, but not enough for you to say this is a guy that extends plays, especially at the time, when comparing to what, Ben Roethlisberger had obviously done, up until that point in his career. I remember the 7 rules of the Bill Parcells 7 rules of drafting a quarterback in him, which now really has become obsolete now because of the underclassmen and the movement. Although I think, didn't Kenny Pickett check all those 7 rules of the Bill Parcells? I remember this. I was higher on Rudolph than most in that draft class.
Yeah, I don't recall my thoughts. I think the concern more broadly was the system. You play in the Big 12, you're in a wide open system. That was the concern with James Washington because he was the one-sided player, just kind of didn't run the most advanced route tree. And Rudolph has overcome that, but that was my thought. I'm looking back at the report on Rudolph, and somebody not with the site anymore wrote the report, and it's been a while, but it's pretty spot on. Talked about his accuracy and ball placement were most attractive. Takes what the defense gives him, kind of safe with the football overall, not an issue outside the pocket and scrambling and extending the play. So seems to be a pretty accurate report to how his career has turned out.
Yeah. That's about, and as far as Pickett goes, I mean, a lot of the things that I think were worrisome about his tape, about leaving the pocket and things of that nature have carried over so far. Not, obviously not big time down the field arm strength. I think Pickett can make a lot of the throws, especially far hash to the outside and all. We obviously haven't seen enough stuff with him towards the middle of the field, although he's had his moments. The game against, what was it, the Jets, his first appearance, standing in the pocket and delivering that with the rush, but there hasn't been enough of that. Obviously, he's been more of an outside the numbers kind of guy. You do have some level of mobility to him, more so than you do with a Mason Rudolph, in my opinion. But it goes without saying, regardless of what people's feelings are about Pickett and Mason Rudolph specifically to this point, you got to get an offensive coordinator in there that can hopefully unlock more of the upside, what may or may not remain with either of those two. The quarterback position, as we've talked about several times, is very important to this team in 2024, and they've got to get better quarterback play out of whoever that person winds up being. And it makes you wonder if it winds up being either Pickett or Mason. You are left, you can't help but wonder how much more they can get out of either one of those two guys.
I agree. And for Kenny Pickett, it has to happen. It has to happen in 2024. There is unlikely to be a 2025 to give him a chance to fix things if things don't go well in 2024. If you're 3 years into Pickett and the results aren't there, you're now talking about, okay, we got to find a quarterback again. So unless Rudolph is a starter and has a great year or something like that. So this is make or break. And maybe Pickett can do it. And I want to see him in a new offense. And I want to see him in a new system. And I mean, he played really well in that one full game post-Canada against the Bengals. I know they only put up 16 points. You had the Deontay near touchdown that got overturned, the turnover the next play. But Pickett, to his credit, he played a really good game in that first one post-Canada.
And the only way we're going to find out more about him is if he wins the starting job in 2024.
Right. And so I think, and I take Pittsburgh at their word when they say it'll be a competition. And let's just assume it's Pickett versus Rudolph competing for the job, that Rudolph resigns and comes back. But we know in their heart of hearts, Pittsburgh wants Kenny Pickett to win the job, to see how he looks in the regular season, to give him that last chance. That's why he's going to be QB1 and probably take the first rep of training camp when they report this July, because they want and kind of need Kenny Pickett to win this job.
Agreed. But I do hope that if indeed Rudolph is brought back, that they make it a true quarterback competition.
Sure. And we'll see what that looks like. Will they rotate each day? Will one start the first preseason game and then one start the next? How will they share reps? All things to talk about down the road, but very interesting because, again, last true quarterback competition to start a year. I mean, in the year that Ben got suspended, was there a competition? How did they handle that? Do you remember, Dave?
No, I don't remember specifically how that went about.
Dennis Dixon. I'm trying to think back to how that year looked in camp because they knew the suspension was there. I truly don't remember. That was 2010. I'd have to go back and research, but maybe that was the last time. But even that wasn't the same because that was a temporary thing for whenever Ben returned, that kind of stuff.
All right. Scott writes in, can you contrast the Shanahan versus McVay versus Andy Reid offensive philosophies, schemes? Which tree do you think the Steelers may prefer for an offensive coordinator candidate? And which do you think would be the best fit for Pickett? Is it possible they hire an OC from one tree, but a quarterback coach or a passing game coordinator from another tree to get the best of both worlds? Wow. How would you compare? I mean, geez.
In this essay, I will.
Yeah.
I don't have a tremendous answer off the top. I haven't dedicated a ton of time to that. And trees are important, but at this point, you're not beholden to one tree or one system. We might get a little too caught up in that kind of verbiage and background. You're in different systems, different quarterbacks. The rate the quarterbacks get hurt in different skill sets, you kind of have to adjust on the fly. And you have more veteran coaches that have been around in the league for a while. They're going to be exposed to different backgrounds. So there's always a philosophy and background. I think you want to be aligned overall. You don't want your OC and your quarterback coach to have radically different views that aren't in lockstep and you're getting different information and not really working cohesively. So that's an element of it. But just because your background might be more West Coast versus, I don't know, something a bit more spread, it doesn't mean that you can't work.
Right. I would think that they would want to stick, more West Coast-ish, right?
Yeah, I mean, Pickett, he came up in a West Coast system at Pitt. That's what he's comfortable with. So that'll be the background. But again, those are more broad-based terms. And what even is the West Coast today? The West Coast isn't the way it was back in the mid-2000s where you're taking 5-step drops from under center. It's all kind of blended together.
Is there look, it's going to be a lot easier to reverse engineer this after the fact.
Yeah. Let's see who the hires are. We'll do our deep dives and we'll kind of evaluate it from there.
Let's see here. Brett Nile. Do you understand why people are wanting the Steelers to trade for another failed high drafted Bears quarterback? Am I right in assuming that the Bears obviously don't think he can be a franchise quarterback or they would not be willing to trade him? To me, why not just go with your current struggling first-round quarterback and not give up the draft assets? You make excellent points about the contractual reasons this is not likely to happen, and that should be attached to every Fields trade rumor report, he writes. Number two, at the time of his drafting, there was talk from the Steelers that they had a first-round grade on Mason Rudolph. I don't know if you had the same valuation at the time, but has your valuation changed now after this run to the playoffs? Do you think they were right? Number three, in your opinion, how big of need to the Steelers do the Steelers believe quarterback is? Boy, there's a lot to chew on there. Anybody, including Fields, and look, there's more Russell Wilson reports out there. We are going to continue to talk about Fields, Russell Wilson, Cousins until those guys either land or don't land. People want something different. That's why they're talking about it. As far as the major media heads, the Peter Kings, who else? The reason they're talking about outsiders as a potential is because of what they portray the Steelers already having, and believing that they need to go outside of that. I do believe that anytime anybody talks about Justin Fields, they should look at what sets up after the fact with the fifth-year option and all like that. I think people just look at it as him landing there and not thinking about what happens after that. Not many people do. We do talk about that aspect of it. I just think a lot of talk about it is because people don't like what the Steelers have now.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of why Chicago's likely or seems poised to move on from Fields, it's a fair point. If they don't think he's the guy, what makes you think Pittsburgh should trust that he can be the guy? But they're also picking first overall, have a chance to take, a Caleb Williams who, could potentially be a real top tier, top 5, top 10 type of quarterback. So if they weren't picking first overall, their calculation of things might be different. But I get the point overall, and it's fair. What else did he have to ask?
We already kind of addressed the Mason Rudolph, where we were evaluation and all like that. Look, I will say this, and Mike Tomlin backed this up, saying undeniable. I think was the word that hit home with me when Mike Tomlin talking about Mason Rudolph in the year-end press conference. I think Mason represented himself well in those final 3-4 games there, enough that you have to consider if you can bring him back at the right price, do it. And that kind of tag teams into his final question. In your opinion, how big of need do the Steelers believe quarterback is? Personally, I think that, and Alex kind of said this earlier, I don't think that they're ready to give up on Kenny Pickett just yet. But in the same breath, I think they are their fallback plan would be Mason Rudolph. And look, I don't think we'll see what happens in the pre-draft process. Like Alex mentioned, we should get a sense real quick if this team is now. Look, this doesn't mean that you can't send somebody to your quarterback coach or your offensive coordinator to a pro day, not have Mike Tomlin there, and this team think about drafting a guy 4th, 5th, 6th. They don't have a 6 right now, I don't think, right?
They have a 6. They don't have a 5th.
They don't have a 5th. So you would obviously have to do something there. But it wouldn't, and there's a lot of holes on this roster and not enough draft picks, but it would not hurt my feelings to see a quarterback at some point drafted in this class just to go through the process again.
Mm-hmm. I think they will. There's a good chance they draft one. I think it'll be in that 6th, 7th round, late day 3 category. To answer the question, I think if they can bring back Rudolph, in their minds, they'll be content with Pickett and Rudolph, and they'll fill out the roster 3 and 4 for camp, however they fill it out. In terms of them looking at quarterbacks, wouldn't be a shock if Mike Tomlin turned up at the LSU Pro Day, right? Because it's right. LSU. And so Jaden Daniels will be there, but there'll be other guys, I'm sure, to look at. And Daniels probably not going to be anywhere in Pittsburgh striking distance. But you look at the other quarterbacks who kind of Caleb Williams not going to be the possibility. Drake May not going to be a possibility. So even if Tomlin's at those pro days, they're not getting those guys. But the next tier guys are who? Michael Penix, right, from Washington, and Bo Nix from Oregon. And if Tomlin's
if they go out west,
which they never do,
right,
then it's okay, game on.
Right. If Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan show up, and look, if they're going to go to Washington, they're going to go to Oregon, right? I don't know. I don't think we don't have the dates on those yet.
No.
But if they show up at those 2 pro days, and like you said, they're probably going to show up at LSU anyway.
They're going to be at Michigan. McCarthy, which is a later round guy, but they always go to Michigan. So it's like those are hard to tell. But if they're at those West Coast pro days, then it's okay. 10 is up.
Oh yeah. You have to really think that maybe they would, maybe they'll be interested in draft one early there. All right, Adam Guest. It's going to be real interesting to see. Circle those pro days when they come out on the calendar there. Let's see. Adam Guest writes in. He's got a bone to pick with Alex here. I just wanted to respond to Alex's challenge about providing a case to fire Austin. Let's assume he's responsible for the defense, because if Tomlin is making the decisions, then that's also not a pro-Austin argument. Even if he's not the reason why the team is underperforming, it's not like he deserves a job. Number 2, they're first in spending in 2022 and second in 2023 as far as defense goes. They're 12th in EPA over the last 2 years. Number 4, they've had injuries, but it's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. In his 34 regular season games as DC, the team has played 31 of 34 with 4 of the top 5 paid players. B, 13 games with all 5. C, 0 games with less than 3. 5, he has listed here. Player rotation is abysmal, leans on these studs to play 80% to 90% of the snaps, even when we have excellent depth as we did this year.
Well, I mean, we agreed that there were times where Herbig wasn't rotating in as much as we thought he should. To that point.
And you can make, why didn't, could they have got Benton on the field more than they did? Guys are constantly visibly exhausted at the end of games, even stating it as much as themselves after games as TJ did after the Titans game. Number 6, here's the most important factor, he writes. I won't list them all out, but look at the games against good quarterbacks. The numbers are bad, but the eye test is worse. The only time they play well against good quarterbacks is when divisional teams occasionally melt down, as the Ravens did earlier this year with their receivers dropping wide open passes. Without a doubt, Baltimore lost that game more than the Steelers won that game. When we had a fully healthy team in week 1 and weeks to prepare, got smoked by a cutting-edge offense. If you can't compete with those, you have no place in this league. He says, I'd rather swing and miss on the next 3 hires and get them out of the way than to have a solid to good defense every year that can't compete with playoff caliber teams. All right, he's made his very detailed case of pushback against you and your post on Austin.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's a good case, and I wasn't saying that it couldn't be laid out. I just wanted to actually see it laid out. I think they did it well. I would just say that Tomlin does have a pretty large role in this defense, and I look at the big 3 in terms of those guys, not about the other highest paid players, because your big 3 are Hayward, Watt, and Fitzpatrick, and they have missed a lot of time without one of those guys being on the field. Watt half the year last year. Hayward half the year this year, Fitzpatrick essentially half the year this year, the back half of the season. And so those things are really damaging. And then the injuries on top of that, just how thin you became an inside linebacker and thin at safety, and how that changes your structure and your scheme, and having to pare things down, and the domino effect it has and what you can and cannot do. It's a fair point. The good quarterbacks have kind of had their way against Pittsburgh, but is a new DC going to change that? How is a new DC going to change that? Is that a scheme thing? Is that a personnel thing? We can probably debate that some more. But there's some layers to that. Then, what is a new DC going to be able to bring it off, or that's going to change that against some of those top tier quarterbacks?
And how much of a puppet is that title when it comes to Mike Tomlin? It's something that's been talked about forever, and nobody really knows the answer to it. But it does feel like Mike Tomlin has a heavy hand with what happens on the defensive side of football.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Again, I think what Austin has been able to help bring is that turnover-focused mindset. Pittsburgh, and obviously when they traded for Mink in 19, that helped a ton too, obviously. But, Austin very much has that turnover circuit. The way they drilled things, they weren't doing the turnover circuit drills in training camp until Austin came in. And you've seen this team really be, aggressive and ball hawking, taking the football away, which is so critical to winning in today's NFL, where teams will move the ball, they'll get yards. That's hard to stop. But can you get red zone stops, and can you take the football away? And Pittsburgh does both exceptionally well, essentially year in and year out. I really do credit Austin for that. And again, just the overall, 6th best scoring defense. Name of the game is points. Yeah, the yards they give up, and some of those things were ugly, and they had a couple of poor showings, no question. But 6th in scoring defense, and more than half their games this year they allowed under 20 points. They were one of the top takeaway teams. Their sack numbers have generally been pretty good, average to above average to tops in the league over the last 3-4 seasons. So just some of those benchmarks based on what they went through. There's criticisms of Austin, no question, and we were critical of them for the rotations and not playing Herbig enough, not playing Benton enough. And there's some scheme things you can probably, talk about. But to me, it doesn't reach that level of go fire this guy, especially, again, knowing how involved Mike Tomlin is in the defense.
We talked about the cornerback position earlier in the show. Outside of Joey Porter, who it took a while for him, obviously, to get implemented heavily into the defense. What did this team really have at corner?
Yeah, they were relatively weak there.
Patrick Peterson's washed at corner, right?
At outside,
outside.
And he was a mess the first month of the season. And they had their growing pains because they had a lot of turnover there, losing Cam Sutton, losing Terrell Edmonds, and they had to kind of figure out the communication aspect early on. But yeah,
I will say Chandon Sullivan played better than what I thought he would the moment they signed him. But even so, I mean, you're not going out of the way to bring that guy back on a lot of money, and you would hope that you would be able to upgrade what his role was in. But I mean, really, what did Levi Wallace is just a guy. I think we agree on that. James Pierre is a special teams guy. You don't know, it's too early to tell what Darius Rush and Corey Trice Jr. might be. Man, you damn sure hope maybe one of those two guys can surface, but there's not enough there to rubber stamp. What did this team have at corner last year other than Joey Porter?
Yeah, it was kind of a mess. And what about safety? Minka went down, and they lost all those guys. So again, my broad-based point is, they were a respectable defense that still held things together despite all they went through injury-wise, especially down the stretch. And to persevere through that, not let it break you and kind of ruin your season, I give them a lot of credit for that.
And look, Larry Ogunjobi, you wanted more than you got out of him this past year. Cam Hayward played on one leg all season.
Yeah, how many sacks did you get from the D-line this year? Not that sacks are the end-all, be-all. I talked about, Benton's pressures, being more impactful and more frequent than the one sack number might indicate. But, they really had not much there once Cam went down. Even when he came back as a pass rusher, he was not that impactful.
What did they have in sacks?
Like 7.5 sacks across the D-line.
Ogunjobi had 3. And he had 8 quarterback hits. Cam Hayward had 2 sacks and 3 quarterback hits. Ooh. Benton had 1 sack, 8 quarterback hits. Leal, 1 sack, 2 quarterback hits.
Which was a face mask they didn't call against Cleveland.
Right. Yeah, good point. Armand Watts, I thought Armand Watts played slightly better than what I envisioned, but even so, half a sack, 3 quarterback hits. They almost have to re-sign Watts, don't they? At maybe a 2-year, $1.5 million per, something like that. They could use him at least back in the room, I think. Montravius Adams missed a lot of time, no sacks. No quarterback hits. He's seen his better days. Not that they were great. Loudermilk, 1 quarterback hit, and that was that push pull. Right? It's bad. It's bad when you can
remember.
It's bad when you can roll back through your head what that one thing was. Obviously,
which was still caught, which wasn't his fault, obviously, but that was that duck that somehow. Who was that against? Was that against Green Bay?
Cincinnati, wasn't it?
Cincinnati, yeah. Okay, you're right. Good call.
Once again, it's we should be ashamed of ourselves that we were able to remember that, at its core. So, less, other than as like the cornerback position, thank God they had Joey Porter Jr. emerge in that room. And as far as the defensive line goes, thank God they had Keanu Benton emerge in that room.
Right. And you could sit there and say, well, maybe, you have to blame the coaching staff for not having enough talent and not, giving them enough to work with. But that's not on Austin. Austin does not make personnel decisions. He coaches. He does not determine who they draft, who they sign, who they keep, that kind of stuff.
Would you bring back? You got to bring back Armand Watts, right?
Yeah, I would. I think as a rotational base end, nose tackle in a pinch, he's serviceable. He did fine.
All right, let's see if we can get one more in here from Justin Brisbane. Writes in, Justin Fields, I'm not as sure as either of you guys are that Mason will be back hypothetically if he isn't re-signed and goes elsewhere. What does that do for you as far as looking harder at Justin Fields? I like the idea of giving some draft capital to take a shot with him rather than signing a veteran with no ceiling such as Tannehill or Brissett, etc. No thanks, he writes. Also, do we not remember how absolutely enamored, in capital letters, Tomlin was with Fields at his pro day? There was literally memes about it. Find someone that looks at you the way Tomlin looks at Fields. Have to fix this quarterback situation and running it back status quo isn't good enough. Even Mason playing at the level he ended the season at isn't good enough, he writes. It was simply just better from very low bar that we had set the first 3 quarters of the season. Addressing the Fields versus Mason, I think those, if I don't think they're attached, Mason and Fields. I think it comes down to, how do you think Justin Fields is a guy that you can attach your wagon to? I believe that to be separate than a Mason Rudolph discussion. I don't think it's like an either or. And once again, it goes back to Justin Fields. If you're all in on him, you're all in on him, and you're not just all in on him in 2024 because you probably got to pick up that 5th-year option, yada yada. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I'm with you there.
And as far as Mike Tomlin being enamored, I mean, we've seen Mike Tomlin show up and at pro days and all, and Mike Tomlin is a lover of the process and he likes to get to know these guys. Did he hit it off with Fields at his pro day? Yeah, I think he did. Do we read sometimes too much into that, Mike Tomlin, and how open he is with players at Senior Bowl, pro days, yada yada?
I don't know. I mean, the history is pretty clear, but I think for all the reasons you mentioned, for all the reasons that Tomlin said, he can still like Justin Fields, can still respect him, doesn't mean he's destined to become a Steeler.
I'll hit one more here from Michael Rocket, writes in, and he's from Haarlem, Netherlands. The Rock from Haarlem, somewhere in Netherlands. Okay. Dear men of the Terrible Podcast, can you clarify why a coach with a losing record as a head coach in college, and this is about Kliff Kingsbury, head coach in college in the NFL, is praised as the solution for the Steelers' offensive coordinator position? Kingsbury had a losing record over his time at Texas Tech when Mahomes started in 2015, 2016. Like Matt Canada, this guy has had limited success, so I apologize for getting angry. But hearing other analysts like Peter King use the fact that Kliff, as a head coach, had many great quarterbacks as a reason to hire him is insane when results at all levels are losing seasons. Heck, I work with smart people. Should I get my next job because of who I worked with, he writes. In closing, what are your positive and negatives about hiring Kliff? I think we've already kind of addressed that earlier in the show. Negative, warning flags, and positive. Feel free to correct my reluctance to consider Kliff a good hire. He don't like Kliff.
Yeah, I can. Must be who's Texas Tech's rival? I wish Oklahoma. I don't know. What I would say to that is, you can be a really good coordinator, but kind of a lousy head coach. They're different skill sets. There's this. The sports world has this Peter principle of you get, promoted and work up the ladder until you reach a level that you can't actually do. And then you fall back down. And so if you're a good coordinator, they think, oh, you can be a head coach. And they're two different skill sets. There's value in being a good coordinator, but really, if you're a good head coach, the criteria for that is so much different than, can you run an offense? Can you scheme an offense? Can you call plays? It's like one of a billion responsibilities you have as a head coach. So you can still be a good coordinator and good offensive mind and not have success in larger, more prominent roles.
Okay. All right. We will leave it there. Kind of started the show talking about Kliff Kingsbury at the beginning, and we'll end it kind of talking about Kliff.
Did that answer his question well enough? Because it kind of went on a little bit. I mean, the first half was him talking about the head coach lack of success. Was there other elements that he didn't?
Just, he goes on to say that losing record even with Mahomes in college. Talk about Peter. Look, Peter King's not my go-to guy when wondering thoughts about an offensive coordinator.
No, you didn't consult him first.
No, not there. I understand. I'll end it with this. I don't think Kliff Kingsbury is the perfect solution for what the Steelers are looking for at offensive coordinator. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I know I'm reintroducing a new topic, but I'm just seeing a comment here from Doug Whaley, apparently was on the Fan, talking about maybe it was difficult to get an OC to come to Pittsburgh. How attractive do you think the Steelers OC job is to candidates just overall?
I don't think it's an ideal quarterback situation, obviously. And
but how many OCs get to walk into ideal quarterback situations?
Right. I mean, there's only so many jobs in the NFL too, and every offensive coordinator at its core probably thinks I can fix that or I can work around that, right?
Right.
I mean, at its core, look, the quarterback position is the most important position in football. So it all starts there. But once again, some of these guys wouldn't care what the situation is just to get, an opportunity to cut their teeth or a second or a third or a fourth opportunity to see what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I don't know if it's the most attractive because, as Whaley points out as I'm reading this, will Pittsburgh pay them the most? Unlikely. We still don't know how much they pay their coordinators and staff, but I doubt it's top dollar. And the quarterback situation is murky. There isn't a high draft pick to get a guy. Chicago, it might be a little murky, but you have Caleb Williams coming, which is certainly really, really alluring. But I think the big thing in Pittsburgh is you can run your offense. I mean, you don't have a head coach that's the play caller or is going to be really micromanaging your decisions, your game planning. You get to kind of run the show. And that, I think, is maybe one of the larger selling points, plus just stability. They want to keep guys. They don't like firing guys. Canada was such that rarity. And so there's a stability and kind of culture, and those things I think will be selling points to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and even though the quarterback position might not be as appealing at first glance, you would think that everybody would be able to sit down after the first season, assuming it is Pickett and Mason, and say, man, the quarterback play held us back here. We're going to move in another direction and let this offensive coordinator see if he can work with the next guy.
Yeah, exactly. Either after this year, either you sit there and say, man, Kenny Pickett was fantastic. He turned it around. He's the guy. We're excited. Or you sit there and say, it didn't work out. Let's go find a quarterback next year. And the OC will have a hand in picking that next quarterback, at least advising, again, not making the decision, but will get to be part of that experience. So, one or two outcomes will have an upside to it after this year.
All right. I think we got everything covered there. So I think we're an hour and a half into this. Time to wrap it up here. So, all right. You can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button up right navigational bar. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, go to SteelersDepot.com. Follow the directions. Find that link at the site as well, too. Alex and I will be back on Friday. Who knows? Maybe we'll have more candidates to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about another draft prospect or two as we get ready for all-star game season here and everything that goes along with that. So, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.